He was having a panic attack. Stop being insecure, my wife said after missing our anniversary dinner to comfort her male co-worker. I didn't argue. I quietly took off my ring and placed it on top of the blue folder sitting on the table. She glanced at the papers inside, dropped her purse and screamed, "Wait, you can't show this to—" "I'm glad to have you here. Follow this story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I had been looking forward to March 15th for weeks. 25 years of marriage deserved something special, something that would remind Kristen and me of why we fell in love in the first place. I spent the entire day preparing her favorite meal, lobster thermidor with roasted asparagus, the same dish we'd shared on our honeymoon in Maine all those years ago. The dining room table was set with our wedding china, the good silverware that we only used for special occasions, and candles flickering in the crystal holders her mother had given us. I'd even managed to find a bottle of the same wine we'd opened on our wedding night, though it had cost me nearly $200 to track down a vintage from 1997. By 6:30, everything was perfect. The lobster was staying warm in the oven, the asparagus was ready to be plated, and I was wearing the navy suit Kristen had always said brought out my eyes. I'd even splurged on a new tie, something I rarely did since becoming more budget-conscious after my mother's medical bills had eaten into our savings. But 6:30 came and went, then 7, then 7:30. At 8:15, my phone finally buzzed with a text message that would change everything between us. "Sorry, honey. Marcus is having a panic attack at work. Can't leave him like this. We'll make it up to you tomorrow. Love you." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard as I tried to formulate a response that wouldn't sound bitter or disappointed. Marcus Chen was Kristen's new colleague at the marketing firm, someone she'd mentioned frequently over the past few months since starting her new position. According to her stories, he was brilliant but fragile, prone to anxiety attacks that left him unable to function. "Hope he feels better soon," I finally typed back. "Dinner will keep." But as I sat there in my expensive suit, looking at the elaborate meal I'd spent hours preparing, something inside me felt different. It wasn't just disappointment. I'd dealt with plenty of that over the years as our marriage had slowly shifted from passionate partnership to comfortable routine. This was something else. Something that felt like awakening from a long sleep. Kristen didn't come home until nearly midnight. I was in bed pretending to read when I heard her key in the lock. She moved quietly through the house, and when she finally slipped into our bedroom, I caught a whiff of something that made my stomach clench. Cologne. Expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. "How's Marcus?" I asked softly, not looking up from my book. She froze for just a moment before continuing to undress. "Better, thankfully. It was really scary for a while there. I couldn't just abandon him when he was in that state." "Of course not," I said, finally meeting her eyes. In the dim light from my reading lamp, I could see that her makeup was slightly smudged. Her hair not quite as perfect as it had been when she left for work that morning, but it was her expression that caught my attention, the way her eyes darted away from mine just a fraction too quickly. "I'm sorry about dinner, Tim. I know you worked hard on it." "It's fine," I lied. "We can celebrate this weekend." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're the best husband in the world, you know that?" As she headed to the bathroom to wash her face, I found myself staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. 25 years of marriage had taught me to read Kristen's moods, her expressions, her tells, and everything about tonight felt wrong. The next morning, I woke up early and reheated the lobster for breakfast, eating alone while Kristen slept in. The expensive wine had gone flat overnight, and the romantic gesture that had seemed so important yesterday now felt foolish. But as I sat there, mechanically cutting through the reheated seafood, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to start paying attention. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice things I'd apparently been blind to before. The way Kristen's phone was always face down on the table during dinner, how she'd started working late at least 3 nights a week, always with explanations about urgent projects or client emergencies. The fact that she'd bought new perfume, something light and floral that she claimed made her feel more confident at work. Most telling of all was how she'd become protective of her schedule, in a way she'd never been before. For years, we'd shared a family calendar on the refrigerator, marking important events and appointments. But suddenly, Kristen's work commitments were too complex to write down, too subject to last-minute changes to plan around. "It's just the nature of the business," she'd explain when I asked about her increasingly erratic hours. "Digital marketing moves fast. I have to be flexible." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. But there were too many small inconsistencies, too many moments when her explanations didn't quite add up. Like the Tuesday evening she came home with wet hair claiming she'd been caught in a rainstorm that the weather report insisted hadn't happened. Or the Friday when she said she'd grabbed dinner with a client, but I could smell the distinct aroma of her favorite Italian restaurant, the one that was in the opposite direction from her office. It was during this period of growing suspicion that I made the decision that would eventually lead to the blue folder. I'd never hired a private investigator before, never imagined I'd be the kind of husband who needed to. But something inside me had broken the night of our anniversary, and I couldn't seem to put it back together. James Patterson came highly recommended by a colleague who'd used his services during his own messy divorce. He was a former police detective, professional and discreet, with an office in a nondescript building downtown. When I met with him on a rainy Thursday afternoon, I felt like I was betraying everything I'd believed about my marriage. "I need to know if my wife is having an affair," I told him, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. James didn't react with surprise or judgment. He simply pulled out a yellow legal pad and started taking notes. "How long have you been suspicious?" "About a month, maybe longer. I think I've been in denial." "That's normal," he said matter-of-factly. "Can you give me her schedule, her routines, the names of people she's mentioned recently?" As I provided him with the details of Kristen's life, her work address, her typical hours, the names of colleagues she'd mentioned, I felt like I was dissecting our marriage with surgical precision. Every piece of information I shared felt like another small betrayal, but I couldn't stop myself. "I charge $500 a day, plus expenses," James explained as we wrapped up the meeting. "Most cases like this take between 1 and 2 weeks to resolve, depending on how careful the subject is being." $500 a day. 10 days of surveillance would cost me $5,000, money that would come out of the account Kristen and I shared, money that had originally been earmarked for a vacation we'd been planning to take for our anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. "One more thing," James said as I prepared to leave. "Are you sure you want to know the truth? Because once we open this door, there's no closing it again." I thought about Kristen sleeping peacefully in our bed while I lay awake wondering where she'd really been. I thought about the elaborate anniversary dinner that had gone cold while she comforted another man. I thought about 25 years of marriage that might have been built on lies I was too trusting to see. "I'm sure," I said, and I meant it. That night, as Kristen told me about her day over dinner, another story about Marcus's ongoing struggles with anxiety, another explanation for why she'd been unreachable for 3 hours in the middle of the afternoon, I listened with new ears. Every detail felt calculated, every explanation too rehearsed. But I smiled and nodded and asked appropriate questions because I'd learned something important during my meeting with James Patterson. If Kristen was lying to me, if she was living a double life, then I needed to be smarter than she was. I needed to gather evidence, build a case, protect myself. I was done being the trusting husband who believed every story, who never questioned convenient explanations or sudden changes in routine. The blue folder that would eventually hold the truth about my marriage was still days away from existing, but the man who would fill it with evidence had already been born. As I went to sleep that night, listening to Kristen breathe beside me, I wondered if I was sleeping next to a stranger. The woman I'd loved for 25 years, who I'd trusted with my heart, my future, my life, was she real, or had she been performing for so long that even she'd forgotten who she really was? I would have my answer soon enough. James Patterson would make sure of that. But first, I had to survive the next week of pretending everything was normal, of playing the role of the oblivious husband while my world quietly crumbled around me. It was going to be the longest week of my life. The waiting was the hardest part. For 5 days after hiring James Patterson, I went through the motions of normal life while my stomach churned with anticipation and dread. Every morning I kissed Kristen goodbye and wished her a good day at work, knowing that somewhere across town, a stranger was watching her every move. I threw myself into my job at the sales office, staying late to avoid going home to an empty house when Kristen worked her increasingly frequent overtime hours. My colleagues probably thought I was gunning for a promotion, the way I suddenly became obsessed with reorganizing client files and updating prospect databases. The truth was, I needed something to occupy my mind while James Patterson slowly dismantled my marriage. On Wednesday of that week, Kristen announced she'd be working late again. "Big presentation tomorrow for the Morrison account," she explained, gathering her things after a dinner she'd barely touched. "Marcus and I need to get the final details hammered out." There was that name again, Marcus, in the 6 weeks since Kristen had started mentioning him. He'd become the explanation for everything. Her late nights, her weekend work sessions, her sudden inability to stick to any schedule we'd previously agreed upon. "Will you be home by 10?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Probably closer to 11, she said, already moving toward the door. "Don't wait up." After she left, I sat in our living room, surrounded by the comfortable furniture we'd chosen together, looking at the family photos that lined the mantelpiece. There we were on our wedding day, both of us so young and sure that love would be enough. Our first house, our vacations, Christmas mornings, anniversary dinners from happier years. When had she stopped being happy? When had I stopped being enough? My phone rang at 9:47. James Patterson's voice was calm and professional, but I could hear something underneath it that made my hands shake. "Timothy, we need to meet, tomorrow morning if possible. You found something." "Yes. Can you come to my office at 8 a.m.? I barely slept that night. Kristen came home at 11:15, just as she'd predicted, smelling faintly of wine and wearing an expression of satisfied exhaustion that I'd once found attractive. Now it made me nauseous. "How did the presentation prep go?" I asked as she got ready for bed. "Really well. Marcus has some brilliant ideas for the Morrison campaign. I think we're going to nail it tomorrow." She kissed my forehead before turning out the lights, and I lay there in the dark wondering if that would be the last time she'd touch me with genuine affection, or if the affection had been fake for longer than I wanted to know. James Patterson's office felt different the next morning. The same sparse furniture, the same motivational posters on the walls, but now there was a manila envelope sitting on his desk that seemed to pulse with dangerous energy. "Before we start," he said, gesturing for me to sit down, "I want you to know that what I'm about to show you will be difficult to see. Are you ready?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He opened the envelope and spread a series of photographs across his desk like playing cards. Black and white surveillance photos, time-stamped and dated. Each one felt like a physical blow. Kristen entering a hotel lobby with a tall man in an expensive suit. The timestamp read, Tuesday, March 22nd, 6:15 p.m. The night she'd said she was working on the Henderson account presentation, Kristen and the same man sitting across from each other at an intimate restaurant table, leaning close together, her hand covering his. Wednesday, March 23rd, 7:43 p.m., the night of the Morrison presentation preparation, Kristen kissing the man goodbye in the parking lot of the same hotel, her arms wrapped around his neck in a way that spoke of long familiarity. Thursday, March 24th, 10:28 p.m., last night when she'd come home, claiming to be exhausted from work. "His name is Marcus Chen," James said quietly. "He's not her colleague. He's the regional marketing director for Chen Industries, a company that has no business relationship with your wife's firm." I stared at the photographs, my vision blurring slightly around the edges. "How long?" "Based on what I've observed, at least 3 months. But Timothy, there's more." He pulled out another set of documents, financial records, printed emails, copies of legal paperwork that made my blood run cold. Your wife and Marcus aren't just having an affair. They're planning to start their own marketing consultancy. They've been using insider information from both of their current employers to build a client list, and they've been meeting with potential investors for the past 6 weeks. I felt like I was underwater, trying to process information that seemed to float just out of reach. Insider information? Client lists, marketing strategies, competitive intelligence. They're essentially planning to steal from both companies to launch their new venture. The initial investment meetings started in February, right around the time your wife's schedule became irregular. He showed me email printouts where Kristen and Marcus discussed which clients they could transition to their new firm, how much startup capital they'd need, and which of their current colleagues they might be able to recruit. The level of detail was staggering. They'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. But it was the last document that truly broke my heart. A handwritten note in Kristen's familiar script, apparently scanned and emailed to Marcus. Can't wait to finally be free to build something real with you. 25 years is long enough to waste on someone who doesn't understand ambition. Timothy will never know what hit him. I set the note down with hands that had started trembling. James was talking, explaining how he'd obtained the information, outlining the legal implications of what Kristen and Marcus were planning, but his words sounded distant and muffled. 25 years is long enough to waste on someone who doesn't understand ambition. She hadn't just fallen out of love with me. She'd grown to despise me, to see our entire marriage as a waste of time, an obstacle to overcome on her way to whatever she thought she deserved. Timothy. James's voice cut through my spiral of thoughts. Are you all right? I looked up at him, this stranger who now knew more about my marriage than I did. What do I do now? That depends on what you want. If you're thinking about divorce, this evidence will be helpful. If you want to report their business plans to their current employers, I can facilitate that. If you want to confront your wife, I'd recommend having legal representation present. Legal representation. Divorce. Reporting them to their employers. A month ago, my biggest concern had been whether to splurge on premium cable channels. Now I was planning the destruction of a 25-year marriage and possibly 2 careers. I need some time to think, I said, gathering up the photographs and documents. Of course. But Timothy, be careful. If they suspect you know, they might accelerate their timeline, and if they're willing to commit corporate espionage, they might not hesitate to take other steps to protect themselves. The drive home from James's office passed in a blur. I kept thinking about Kristen's note, the casual cruelty of reducing our marriage to wasted time. Had she been thinking that when we celebrated our 20th anniversary, our 21st, when exactly had love turned to contempt, and how had I missed it? I called in sick to work and spent the day in my home office, organizing the evidence James had given me into neat piles. The photographs went in one stack, the financial documents in another, the emails and legal papers in a third. Then I put everything into a blue folder I'd bought for organizing tax documents, something ordinary and unremarkable that could sit on my desk without attracting attention. That blue folder became my anchor over the next few days. When Kristen told me about her day, spinning elaborate stories about client meetings and project deadlines, I would think about the folder and remind myself that I knew the truth now. When she apologized for missing dinner because of a work emergency, I would picture the photographs of her kissing Marcus in a hotel parking lot. The strangest part was how normal everything seemed on the surface. Kristen still asked about my day, still commented on the weather, still reminded me to pick up milk on my way home from work. The woman who had written that cruel note about wasting 25 years was the same woman who folded my laundry and left encouraging notes in my lunch bag. Had she always been this good at compartmentalizing? Had our entire marriage been a performance? On Sunday evening, as we sat watching television together on the couch we'd bought for our 10th anniversary, Kristen reached over and took my hand. "I love you, Timothy," she said softly, her thumb tracing circles on my palm. "I know I've been distracted with work lately, but you know that, right? That I love you?" I looked into her eyes, searching for some sign of the woman who had written those horrible words about our marriage, but all I saw was the face I'd been waking up next to for 25 years. "I love you too," I said, because I did. Even knowing what I knew, even seeing the evidence of her betrayal spread across James Patterson's desk, I still loved the woman I'd married. The problem was, I was no longer sure that woman actually existed. That night, after Kristen fell asleep, I lay in the dark making plans. I couldn't confront her yet. I needed to understand the full scope of what she and Marcus were planning first. But I also couldn't continue pretending that everything was normal while she systematically destroyed our life together. The blue folder sat in my desk drawer, waiting for me to decide what to do with its contents. But for the first time since this nightmare had started, I felt like I had some control over the situation. Kristen might be playing a game I hadn't known existed, but now I knew the rules. I spent the next week becoming someone I'd never been before, a husband who investigated his own wife. Every morning after Kristen left for work, I would pull out the blue folder and study its contents like a detective building a case. But the more I learned, the more I realized that what James Patterson had uncovered was just the beginning. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening when Kristen made a mistake that would cost her everything. She was in the shower getting ready for another late client meeting when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen and saw a text from Marcus that made my blood freeze. Investment meeting moved to Friday. Patterson Industries confirmed 300,000. We're almost there, baby. Patterson Industries. I knew that name. They were one of my company's biggest competitors, a firm we'd been trying to land for months. If Kristen and Marcus were meeting with them, it could only mean one thing. They were stealing our clients along with everything else. I quickly wrote down the details and slipped the phone back into place, just as I heard the shower turn off. When Kristen emerged, wrapped in her terry cloth robe, I was reading a magazine as if nothing had happened. "Who was that?" I asked casually, not looking up from an article about golf techniques I had no interest in learning. "Who was what?" "Your phone buzzed. Thought it might be important." She picked up her phone, checking the screen with the practiced nonchalance of someone who'd been hiding things for months. "Just a reminder about tomorrow's presentation. Nothing urgent." Another lie delivered so smoothly that if I hadn't seen the text myself, I would have believed it completely. The next morning, I called in sick again and drove to James Patterson's office with a list of questions that had kept me awake all night. "I need you to dig deeper," I told him, sliding a piece of paper across his desk. "Patterson Industries, Chen Industries, anyone else they might be meeting with? I think this is bigger than we thought." James studied my handwritten notes, his expression growing more serious as he read. "Industrial espionage," he said finally. "If they're stealing client information and using it to poach accounts, we're talking about felony charges, not just adultery." "Can you prove it?" "Give me another week. But Timothy, if I find what I think I'm going to find, your wife could be looking at serious jail time. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Kristen getting dressed for work that morning, kissing my cheek goodbye, reminding me to pick up her dry cleaning. The woman who still made my coffee exactly the way I liked it, who still laughed at my terrible jokes, who still reached for my hand when we walked through parking lots. "I'm prepared for the truth," I said, "whatever it is." That weekend, Kristen announced she needed to work both Saturday and Sunday to prepare for a major presentation the following week. "It's the biggest account we've ever pitched," she explained as she packed her laptop bag. "If we land this one, it could change everything for the company." I smiled and told her I understood, kissed her goodbye, and wished her luck. Then I spent the weekend doing something I'd never imagined I'd have to do. I followed my own wife. Saturday morning, instead of going to her office building, Kristen drove to the Marriott downtown. I parked across the street and watched as she met Marcus in the lobby, both of them dressed like they were attending a funeral rather than a casual work session. They disappeared into the elevator together, and I spent the next 3 hours sitting in my car, wondering what they were really doing in that hotel room. Sunday was worse. This time, They met at an expensive restaurant on the other side of town, joined by two men in expensive suits who looked like the kind of people who made seven-figure decisions over lunch. I couldn't get close enough to hear their conversation, but I didn't need to. The body language told the story. Leaning in conspiratorially, shaking hands over contracts, raising champagne glasses to toast agreements I wasn't supposed to know about. When Kristen came home Sunday evening, she was glowing with excitement. "How did the presentation prep go?" I asked, setting aside the book I'd been pretending to read. "Amazing! I think we're really onto something special, Tim. This could be the opportunity I've been waiting for my whole career." She wasn't lying about that part. This was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, the chance to steal enough clients and inside information to launch her own company with her lover. The fact that it would destroy my career and our marriage was apparently just collateral damage. Monday morning brought the call I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "Timothy, we need to meet immediately," James said, his voice tight with urgency. "What I've found, it's worse than we thought." This time, his desk was covered with enough documents to fill 3 blue folders: financial records, email printouts, legal contracts, incorporation papers, and photographs that painted a picture so damning that I felt sick just looking at it. "Your wife and Marcus Chen have been planning this for 8 months, James began, spreading the evidence out like a prosecutor presenting a case. "They've already incorporated their new company, MC Strategic Solutions. They've secured initial funding of $500,000 from investors who think they're getting proven marketing executives with established client relationships." He showed me copies of the incorporation papers, filed in February, listing Kristen as CEO and Marcus as Chief Strategy Officer. Their business address was a luxury office suite downtown, already leased and furnished with money from their investors. "But here's the really damaging part," James continued, pulling out a thick folder of printed emails. "They've been systematically copying client databases from both their employers. Your wife has been photographing confidential documents, copying strategic plans, even recording private meetings without permission." The emails between Kristen and Marcus were breathtakingly casual in their criminality. They discussed which clients would be easiest to steal, how to time their resignations for maximum damage to their current employers, and how much proprietary information they'd need to copy before making their move. But it was the personal emails that cut the deepest. "I can't wait to be done. Pretending," Kristen had written in one message. 25 years of playing house with someone who has no vision, no ambition, no drive to be anything more than ordinary. Timothy's a good man, but he's small-minded. He'll never understand what we're building." In another, "The hardest part isn't the lying. It's having to act grateful for a life I outgrew years ago. When we launch MC Strategic, I'll finally be free to be who I really am." And the most devastating, "Tim still thinks I'm the same 25-year-old girl he married. He has no idea that person died of boredom years ago." I set that last email down and looked up at James, who was watching me with the careful expression of someone who'd delivered bad news to too many people. "There's more," he said gently. "They're planning to resign from their current jobs next Friday and start poaching clients immediately. They expect to be fully operational within 30 days. "Next Friday," I repeated numbly. "That's in 6 days. "Yes. And Timothy, there's something else you need to know. Your wife has been transferring money from your joint savings account into a personal account she opened 3 months ago. Small amounts, never enough to trigger alerts, but it adds up to just over $37,000. $37,000. Money we'd saved together, money that was supposed to be for our future, for emergencies, for the life we were supposed to be building together. She'd been stealing from me to fund her escape plan. I thought about all the times she'd suggested we should be more careful with money, all the small economies she'd proposed over the past few months. No wonder she'd been so concerned about our budget. She was secretly draining our savings to finance her new life with Marcus. "What are my options?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Legally, you have several courses of action. You can report the corporate espionage to both employers. they'll likely face criminal charges. You can freeze your joint accounts to prevent further theft. You can file for divorce and use this evidence to protect your assets, or—" He paused, studying my face carefully. "You can confront them before they make their move." "What do you mean?" "They think they're safe. They think you're the trusting husband who will never suspect anything. But you have 6 days to disrupt their timeline, to take control of the situation before they can execute their plan." I gathered up the evidence, now enough to fill 2 blue folders instead of 1, and drove home in a daze. The house felt different when I walked through the door, tainted by the knowledge of what Kristen had been planning in these same rooms, where we'd shared 25 years of what I'd thought was genuine love. That evening, as Kristen told me about her day, more lies about client meetings and project deadlines, I found myself studying her face like I was seeing it for the first time. How had someone I'd loved for so long become so skilled at deception? When had she learned to look me in the eyes while systematically destroying everything we'd built together? "You seem distracted tonight," she said as we got ready for bed. "Everything okay?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time in weeks, I told her the complete truth. "Actually, I've been thinking a lot lately about ambition," I said carefully. "About what it means to build something meaningful with your life." Her eyes flickered with interest. "What brought that on?" "Just wondering if I've been too small-minded, you know. Too satisfied with ordinary when I should be reaching for something bigger." For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw excitement flash across her face, followed quickly by calculation as she tried to figure out if this conversation was leading somewhere dangerous. "I think," she said slowly, "that it's never too late to dream bigger, to want more. Even if it means leaving behind everything you've built before." "Especially then," she said, and there was real passion in her voice now. "Sometimes you have to be willing to burn down the old life to build the new one." I nodded thoughtfully, as if I were considering her words instead of recognizing them as a confession. "You're right," I said. "Sometimes you do have to burn down the old life." She smiled and kissed my forehead, the same gentle gesture she'd been giving me for 25 years. But now I understood what I was really seeing, the kiss of Judas, delivered with practiced tenderness, by someone who'd already decided I was expendable. As she drifted off to sleep beside me, I lay in the dark, making plans of my own. Kristen thought she was 6 days away from freedom, from finally escaping the small-minded husband who'd never understood her ambition. She was wrong about a lot of things, but she was especially wrong about that timeline. Her old life was going to burn down much sooner than she expected. The thing about living with a master manipulator is that once you recognize the techniques, you start to see them everywhere. Over the next few days, as I waited for the right moment to act, I watched Kristen deploy every psychological weapon in her arsenal with the precision of a surgeon. It started Tuesday morning when I mentioned casually that I'd been thinking about our future. "Oh," she said, not looking up from her coffee. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her grip tightened slightly on her mug. "Yeah, just wondering if we should be more adventurous, maybe make some big changes." She set down her coffee and turned to face me, her expression carefully neutral. "What kind of changes?" "I don't know. Career moves, maybe. Life moves. Sometimes I feel like we've gotten stuck in a routine." For the next 20 minutes, Kristen gave me a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She started with validation, telling me how proud she was that I was finally thinking about growth, how she'd been hoping I'd develop more ambition. Then came the subtle undermining. Questions about whether I was really ready for big changes, whether I had the skills to compete in today's marketplace, whether I might be having some kind of midlife crisis. "I just want to make sure you're thinking clearly about this," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You've been so comfortable in your current position for so long. Sometimes when people start talking about dramatic changes, it's because they're feeling insecure about something else." Insecure. The word hung in the air between us like a slap. She was already laying the groundwork for her eventual exit, planting seeds that would let her paint me as the unstable one when she finally left. "You might be right," I said, playing my part. "Maybe I'm just going through a phase." "That's what I love about you, Tim," she said, her smile warm and patronizing. "You're so self-aware, so willing to listen to reason." That afternoon, I met with my lawyer for the first time. Sarah Mitchell was a family law attorney who came recommended by James Patterson, someone who specialized in high-asset divorces involving corporate malfeasance. Her office was decorated in soothing blues and grays, designed to make people going through the worst moments of their lives feel slightly more human. "This is quite a case," she said after reviewing the evidence I'd brought. "Corporate espionage, theft, fraud. Your wife and her partner have exposed themselves to both criminal and civil liability. What's my best move? From a legal standpoint, you want to act before they do. File for divorce, freeze the joint accounts, report the corporate theft to their employers, strike hard and fast before they have time to hide assets or destroy evidence." "And from a personal standpoint?" Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying me with the careful attention of someone who'd seen every variation of human betrayal. "That depends on what you want. Justice, revenge, a clean break, or are you still hoping to save the marriage?" I thought about Kristen's performance that morning, the way she'd managed to make me question my own sanity while simultaneously planning to destroy my life. "I want her to understand that actions have consequences," I said finally. "I want her to realize that she misjudged me." "Then timing is everything. You need to confront her when she's most vulnerable, when she thinks she's safest. People like your wife, they're most dangerous when they're cornered, but they're most honest when they think they've already won." That evening, Kristen came home with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine, more affectionate than she'd been in months. She curled up next to me on the couch, her head on my shoulder, talking about her day in the kind of intimate detail she usually reserved for special occasions. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning," she murmured, her fingers tracing circles on my chest. "About making changes, being more adventurous. Yeah? Maybe we should plan a trip somewhere. Europe, maybe. Take a real vacation for once." I almost laughed. Europe. She was planning to leave me within days, and she was talking about vacation plans like we had a future together. It was either the cruelest manipulation I'd ever experienced, or she was so deep in her double life that she'd lost track of which version of herself she was supposed to be. "That sounds wonderful," I said, stroking her hair. "When were you thinking?" "Maybe this fall. After things settle down at work. I might have some big changes coming professionally, but once that's all sorted out, we could really focus on us." Big changes. She was going to quit her job and steal half their clients, but she was describing it like a promotion. The audacity was breathtaking. "What kind of changes?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She pulled back to look at me, and for a moment I saw something genuine in her expression. Excitement mixed with fear, like a child about to confess to something she knew was wrong but couldn't resist doing anyway. "I can't talk about it yet," she said finally. "But Tim, it could change everything for us, everything." She wasn't wrong about that. Her plan would definitely change everything, just not in the way she expected. The next morning brought another revelation. While Kristen was in the shower, her phone rang with a call from someone listed as Dr. Matthews. I didn't answer, but I did notice that it was the third call from the same number in 2 days. When she came out of the bathroom, toweling her hair, I mentioned the calls casually. "Oh, that's probably about my appointment next week," she said, but I caught the slight hesitation before she answered. "Everything okay? You didn't mention any appointments." "Just routine stuff. You know how doctors are, they want to follow up on everything." Another lie, delivered with the same practiced smoothness. But this one felt different, heavier somehow. I added it to my mental list of things to investigate, another thread in the web of deception she'd been weaving around our marriage. That afternoon, while Kristen was at her client meeting, which I now knew was actually a planning session with Marcus and their investors, I called Dr. Matthews' office. "I'm calling about my wife's upcoming appointment," I told the receptionist. "Kristen Henderson? I wanted to confirm the time." "Let me check. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't show any appointments for a Kristen Henderson. Are you sure you have the right office? This is Dr. Matthews' office, right? Internal medicine? No, sir. This is Dr. Matthews' fertility clinic. The phone slipped in my hand. Fertility clinic. Kristen was 50 years old and we'd never discussed having children. We'd never even discussed the possibility of having children. But she was calling a fertility clinic while planning to leave me for another man. The implications hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just planning to steal my clients and my money, she was planning to have Marcus's baby. They weren't just starting a business together, they were starting a whole new life, complete with the family we'd never had. I hung up the phone and sat in my car in the parking lot of an office building downtown, staring at nothing while my mind raced. 25 years of marriage, and she'd never once suggested that she might want children. But apparently, with the right man, the ambitious man, the man who understood her vision, she was ready to become a mother. It was the final piece of evidence I needed to understand exactly how expendable I'd become in her new life plan. I wasn't just the boring husband she'd outgrown, I was the obstacle preventing her from having everything she'd ever really wanted. That night I made my decision. Tomorrow was Thursday, exactly 1 week before Kristen and Marcus planned to resign from their jobs and launch their new company. It was time to show them both that they'd underestimated the small-minded husband who supposedly lacked vision and ambition. But first, I had one more performance to give. As Kristen got ready for bed, chatting about her fictional day at the office, I played the role of the trusting husband one last time. "I love you," I told her as she settled in beside me, and I meant it. I loved the woman I'd married, the woman I'd thought I'd been living with for 25 years. The fact that she might never have actually existed didn't change how I felt about her. "I love you too," she said, kissing my cheek with the same tenderness she'd always shown. "More than you know." More than I knew. She was right about that too. I hadn't known about Marcus, about the business plan, about the stolen money, about the fertility clinic, about any of it. I'd been living in a fantasy while she'd been planning her escape. But as I lay there listening to her breathe in the darkness, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For months I'd been questioning my instincts, wondering if I was being paranoid or jealous or small-minded. Now I knew the truth. My instincts had been right all along. I wasn't crazy and I wasn't insecure. I was married to a stranger who'd been playing a 25-year con game, and tomorrow I was going to end it. The blue folders in my desk drawer contained enough evidence to destroy 2 careers and send 2 people to prison. But more importantly, they contained something I'd been missing for months: the truth about my own life. Tomorrow, Kristen was going to discover that the small-minded husband she'd been manipulating for months had been building a case against her with the same methodical attention to detail that had made me successful in business. She was going to learn that underestimating someone for 25 years doesn't make them weak, it makes them invisible until the moment they choose to be seen. And when that moment came, she was going to realize that she'd made the biggest mistake of her carefully planned life. She'd betrayed the wrong man. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for April, the kind of spring day that usually filled me with optimism about the future. But as I sat at our kitchen table watching Kristen prepare for what she thought was just another day of deception, I felt nothing but cold determination. She was humming while she made coffee, the same unconscious melody she'd been humming for weeks. Now I understood why. It was probably a song Marcus had introduced her to, another small intimacy they shared that had nothing to do with our marriage. "You're up early," she said, noticing I was already dressed in my best suit. "Big day at work," I replied, which wasn't entirely a lie. "Important presentation." She smiled and kissed my cheek, the same gesture she'd given me thousands of times before. But this morning I noticed how quickly she pulled away, how her attention was already somewhere else. "I'll probably be late again tonight," she said, gathering her things. "The Morrison account needs some last-minute adjustments." Morrison account. Even now, with everything I knew, she was still lying about details that didn't matter. It was like a compulsion with her, an inability to tell the truth even when a simple "I'll be late" would have sufficed. Of course, I said. I understand. After she left, I sat in the quiet kitchen for a few more minutes, gathering my resolve. Then I went to my desk and pulled out both blue folders, their contents now organized with the precision of a legal brief. Every photograph, every document, every piece of evidence had been cataloged and cross-referenced. Sarah Mitchell had helped me prepare a timeline that would make the scope of Kristen's deception impossible to deny. My first stop was Kristen's office. I'd never visited her new workplace before. She'd always discouraged it, claiming her boss was strict about personal visits. Now I understood the real reason. The building was exactly the kind of sleek, modern space that would appeal to someone planning to steal proprietary information. Glass walls, open floor plans, workstations where it would be easy to photograph documents without being noticed. The receptionist looked surprised when I introduced myself as Kristen Henderson's husband. "Oh, I didn't realize Kristen was married," she said, checking her computer screen. "Are you here to see her? Because she's not in today. She called in sick this morning." Sick? Of course she had. She was probably across town right now, meeting with Marcus to finalize the details of their resignation letters. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with her supervisor," I said. "It's about a security matter." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from David Walsh, Kristen's department head, watching his expression change from confusion to alarm as I spread the contents of my blue folders across his conference table. "This is quite serious," he said, studying the photographs of Kristen and Marcus at their clandestine meetings. "If she's been copying client information." "She has," I said, showing him the printed emails where she and Marcus discussed which accounts they planned to steal. "They've been planning this for months. They intend to resign tomorrow and start poaching your clients immediately." David's face went pale as he read through the evidence. "We'll need to involve legal counsel immediately, and security. If she has access to our systems..." "I've already made copies for your legal team," I said, handing him a sealed envelope. "But I wanted you to know before I take the next step." "Which is?" I looked out the conference room window at the city below, thinking about Kristen somewhere out there, believing she was hours away from pulling off the perfect crime. "I'm going to give her a chance to confess," I said. "Tonight." My next stop was Chen Industries, where a similar conversation with Marcus's supervisor yielded the same shocked reaction and promises of immediate legal action. By noon, both companies had frozen access to their systems for both Kristen and Marcus, changed passwords, and begun internal investigations that would ultimately lead to criminal charges. But I wasn't done yet. My final appointment of the day was with the investors who'd been funding MC Strategic Solutions. James Patterson had identified them through corporate records, 3 businessmen who thought they were backing experienced marketing executives with legitimate client relationships. They deserved to know they'd been lied to. The meeting took place in a downtown office building, in a conference room that smelled like expensive cologne and broken dreams. When I finished presenting my evidence, the lead investor, a man named Robert Kim, sat back in his chair and let out a long, slow whistle. $500,000, he said quietly. "They've already spent nearly $200,000 of it on office space and equipment." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. These men had been victims of Kristen's scheme just as much as I had. "Don't be sorry," Robert said, his voice hardening. "Be thorough. We want every dollar back, plus damages. Your wife and her partner are going to learn what happens when you steal from people who have lawyers on retainer." That evening I went home and prepared for the most important performance of my life. I set the dining room table with our wedding china, lit candles, opened a bottle of wine. To anyone watching, it would look like I was planning a romantic dinner. But the blue folders were waiting in my study, along with the divorce papers Sarah Mitchell had prepared that afternoon. Kristen came home at 7:30, looking flustered and distracted. She barely noticed the elaborate table setting as she hurried toward the stairs. "Sorry, Tim. I need to shower and change. Long day." "Wait," I said, my voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." Something in my tone made her stop and turn around. For the first time in months, I had her complete attention. "Is everything all right?" she asked, and I heard genuine concern in her voice. She still cared about me, in whatever way she was capable of caring about anyone. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the dining room table. "Please." She moved slowly, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for escape routes. When she saw the blue folders sitting beside my place setting, her face went very pale. "Tim, what's going on?" I poured myself a glass of wine with steady hands, then looked across the table at the woman I'd loved for 25 years. "I know about Marcus," I said simply. The effect was immediate and devastating. Kristen's carefully maintained composure cracked like thin ice, and I saw raw fear flash across her features before she tried to pull herself together. "I don't know what you mean." "I know about the affair. I know about MC Strategic Solutions. I know about the stolen client lists, the fraudulent investor meetings, the money you've been taking from our savings account." I opened the first blue folder and pulled out the photograph of her kissing Marcus in the hotel parking lot. "I know about the fertility clinic." That last detail hit her like a physical blow. She actually flinched, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach, in a gesture that told me everything I needed to know. "You're pregnant," I said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Tears started streaming down her face, but she still didn't speak. She just stared at the photograph as if it were a snake that might bite her. "How long?" I asked. 6 weeks, she whispered. 6 weeks. While she'd been lying to my face every day, while she'd been stealing from me and planning to destroy my career, she'd been carrying another man's child. "Why?" I asked, and my voice broke slightly on the word. 25 years, Kristen. Why wasn't that enough?" She looked up at me then, and for the first time in months I saw the real woman underneath the performance. She was terrified, desperate, and completely trapped. "Because I was dying," she said, her voice barely audible. "Every day in this house, in this life, I felt like I was disappearing. You're a good man, Tim, but you never wanted more than this. You never wanted to build something bigger, to take risks, to really live. So you decided to steal and lie and destroy everything we built together?" "I decided to save myself," she said, anger finally breaking through the fear. "I'm 50 years old. This was my last chance to have the life I actually wanted instead of the one I settled for." Settled for. There it was. The truth I'd been afraid to hear. Our entire marriage had been her settling for less than what she thought she deserved. I opened the second blue folder and spread its contents across the table, bank records showing her theft, emails detailing the corporate espionage, legal documents proving the fraud. Her face went whiter with each piece of evidence. "Your last chance is gone," I said quietly. "Both companies know what you've been doing. The investors know they've been lied to. The police will probably be involved by tomorrow." She started crying harder then, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "Tim, please, we can work this out. I can fix this." How? By lying to me some more? By stealing more money? By having Marcus's baby while pretending to be my faithful wife? She had no answer for that because there was no answer. She'd constructed such an elaborate web of deception that there was no way back to anything resembling truth. I pulled out the divorce papers and set them beside the evidence. "I've filed for divorce," I said. "I've frozen our joint accounts to prevent any more theft. I've reported the corporate espionage to both your employers, and I've provided evidence of fraud to the investors you've been deceiving." She stared at the papers, her hands shaking too badly to pick them up. "You can sign these now, or you can sign them after you've hired a lawyer and spent money you don't have fighting a case you can't win. Either way, this marriage is over." "Tim, please," she whispered. "I know I've made mistakes, but we can—" "Mistakes?" I cut her off, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "Forgetting to take out the trash is a mistake. Sleeping with another man while planning to steal my career and my money, that's not a mistake, Kristen. That's who you really are." She collapsed forward, her face in her hands, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Part of me, the part that had loved her for 25 years, wanted to comfort her, to find some way to fix this impossible situation, but the larger part of me, the part that had been humiliated and betrayed and systematically deceived for months, felt nothing but cold satisfaction. She was finally experiencing consequences for her actions, finally understanding that her choices had prices she couldn't afford to pay. "What about the baby?" she asked through her tears. I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd been planning to leave me for months while pretending to love me every night. "That's between you and Marcus," I said finally. "Assuming he still wants anything to do with you when he finds out his business partner just destroyed both your careers." She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "You told them everything?" "I told them the truth, something you seem to have forgotten how to do." She signed the papers with shaking hands, her tears smearing the ink. When she finished, she looked up at me one last time. "I did love you," she said. "At the beginning, I really did." "I know," I said, and I meant it. "But love without respect, without honesty, without loyalty, that's not really love at all. That's just convenience." She gathered her things and left that night, moving out of the house we'd shared for 15 years with nothing but a suitcase and the weight of her own choices. I watched from the window as she loaded her car, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief. For the first time since our anniversary dinner had been ruined by her lies, I was alone in my own house without having to wonder who she was really with or what she was really planning. The uncertainty was over. The deception was finished. The blue folders sat empty on the dining room table, their contents now in the hands of lawyers and investigators who would ensure that justice was served. But their real purpose had already been fulfilled. They had given me back the truth about my own life. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment making coffee for one person and finding peace in the simple ritual. The morning sun streamed through windows that looked out over a small garden instead of the suburban street where Kristen and I had lived our complicated life. Everything here was mine, chosen by me, arranged by me, paid for with money that belonged only to me. The aftermath of that night had unfolded exactly as I'd expected, though with more drama than I'd anticipated. Kristen and Marcus had both been arrested within a week, charged with corporate espionage, fraud, and theft. The investors had sued for recovery of their funds plus damages. Both companies had fired them immediately and were pursuing their own legal remedies. Marcus, it turned out, was less committed to their grand romance when it came with criminal charges attached. He'd tried to pin the entire scheme on Kristen, claiming she'd manipulated him into participating. The courts hadn't believed him, but the betrayal had shattered whatever illusions Kristen still held about their future together. She'd called me once about 3 months after everything collapsed, sobbing into the phone about how she'd lost everything: her job, her freedom, her lover, and the baby she'd miscarried during the stress of the legal proceedings. "I'm sorry," she'd whispered through her tears. "Tim, I'm so sorry for everything." I'd listened to her cry for nearly 10 minutes before responding, not because I was cruel, but because I was trying to find some emotion other than pity for this woman who'd once been the center of my world. "I'm sorry too," I'd said finally. "Sorry that you thought so little of me, and of yourself, that you believed this was your only option." That had been our last conversation. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks later, and I'd signed the papers with the same sense of relief I'd felt that first night. Some chapters of life end with dramatic confrontations, but others simply close with the quiet sound of a pen on paper. Now, as I sat in my small dining room reading the morning news over breakfast, I reflected on how different my life looked than it had a year ago. The house was gone, sold to cover Kristen's legal fees and restitution payments. Most of our shared possessions had been divided or sold, but everything I'd kept felt essential, purposeful, free of the complicated history that had weighed down our shared life. My career had actually improved in ways I'd never expected. Word of how I'd handled the corporate espionage situation had spread through our industry, earning me a reputation for integrity and thoroughness that had led to a promotion and a significant raise. The betrayal that was supposed to destroy my professional life had instead enhanced it. More importantly, I'd discovered something about myself during those months of investigation and confrontation. I wasn't the passive, unambitious man Kristen had described in her emails. I was methodical, strategic, and capable of making difficult decisions when the situation required it. I simply chose my battles carefully. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. When I opened it, I found Sarah Mitchell holding a bottle of champagne and wearing the satisfied expression of a lawyer who'd just won a significant case. "It's over," she said, stepping into my apartment. "Kristen pled guilty to all charges this morning, 18 months in minimum security prison, 5 years probation, and full restitution to all parties. Marcus got 2 years since the judge wasn't impressed with his attempt to blame everything on your ex-wife." I took the news calmly, feeling neither triumph nor sadness. Justice had been served, but it felt more like the completion of a necessary process than a cause for celebration. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked, studying my expression carefully. "Free," I said, and realized it was completely true. For the first time in years, I feel completely free. We opened the champagne, though neither of us was really in a celebrating mood. This wasn't a victory party. It was more like a wake for the life I'd thought I'd been living. "What's next for you?" Sarah asked as we sat on my small balcony, looking out over the city. "I'm thinking about traveling," I said. "There are places Kristen never wanted to go, things she thought were boring or unsophisticated. Maybe it's time I found out what I actually enjoy when I'm not trying to please someone else." "That sounds healthy." "And I'm thinking about writing," I added, surprising myself by saying it out loud, "about what it's like to discover that the life you thought you were living was completely fictional." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. There might be other people who could benefit from hearing that story. After she left, I sat alone on my balcony as the sun set over the city. In the distance, I could hear the sounds of other people's lives. Traffic, conversations, music from open windows. But instead of feeling lonely, I felt connected to something larger than the small, deceptive world I'd been living in with Kristen. My phone buzzed with a text message from my sister Ellen, who lived across the country with her family. "Thinking of you today. Know it's been hard, but you're stronger than you realize. Love you." Ellen had been one of the few people who'd supported me completely through the divorce. Most of our mutual friends had initially tried to stay neutral, unable to understand how the quiet, devoted couple they'd known for decades had imploded so dramatically. But Ellen had never liked Kristen, had always sensed something calculating underneath her charm. "I always felt like she was auditioning for the role of your wife, instead of actually being your wife," Ellen had said when I'd called her after that first night with the blue folders. "Like she was playing a character she thought you wanted instead of showing you who she really was." She'd been right about that, as she'd been right about so many things I'd been too close to see. I texted her back. "Stronger and freer. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cooked an elaborate meal just for myself. Not because it was a special occasion, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I wanted to. I made paella, something Kristen had always claimed was too complicated and exotic for regular dinners. I opened a good bottle of wine, lit candles, and ate slowly while reading a book about solo travel through Spain. As I cleaned up afterward, I thought about the blue folders that had changed my life. They were long gone now, their contents photocopied and filed away in lawyers' offices and court records. But their real value hadn't been as evidence against Kristen. Their real value had been as proof to myself that I was capable of more than I'd believed. I'd spent 25 years trying to be the husband I thought Kristen wanted, accommodating her moods, supporting her dreams, believing that love meant making myself smaller so she could feel larger. But that hadn't been love. It had been fear. Fear of losing her, fear of being alone, fear of discovering that I might not be enough for someone I thought was extraordinary. Now I understood that the extraordinary thing wasn't Kristen's ambition or intelligence or charm. The extraordinary thing was what happened when someone finally chose to be honest about what they wanted, what they deserved, and what they were willing to accept. Kristen had been dishonest about all of those things, and it had destroyed her life. But in forcing me to confront the truth about our marriage, she'd accidentally given me the greatest gift possible, the chance to build a life based on who I actually was, instead of who I thought someone else wanted me to be. Over the following months, I did travel to Spain, where I discovered that I loved flamenco music and late dinners and conversations with strangers in broken Spanish. I learned to paint watercolors, took a creative writing class, and started volunteering at a literacy center where I helped adults who were learning to read. I went on dates with women who knew nothing about my history, except that I was a recently divorced man who'd decided to explore new possibilities. Some of those dates led to second dates, and one led to a relationship with a woman named Catherine who taught art therapy and had the most honest laugh I'd ever heard. But more than any of that, I learned to enjoy my own company. I learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely, that cooking for one person could be just as satisfying as cooking for two, that having complete control over your own life was a luxury worth protecting. The blue folders were gone, but the man they'd helped create was still here. Stronger, wiser, and finally free to become whoever he chose to be. On the first anniversary of the night, everything had changed. I made myself the same meal I'd prepared for Kristen, lobster thermidor and roasted asparagus, with the same expensive wine I'd opened for our anniversary dinner. But this time, I ate every bite while it was still hot, savored every sip of wine, and felt grateful for every moment of peace.